April 2022. So I was able to go on a real full book tour, which a lot of my friends who had books out in 2020 and 2021 didn't get to do. But it was also so early that about half was on Zoom. People were still doing a ton of Zoom book events, but also things were opening up. So I really got to do kind of the best of both worlds that year, and that I got to go to a lot of book festivals that were, had been closed for 2 years, and then there were a lot of bookstores that wanted to do events, but they weren't really having large gatherings yet. So I got to do a lot of Zooms for the book. It was great.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and start.
Great.
Since we're all here, I know a lot of people probably don't know me. So, good evening. I'm Shanna Fields. I'm the host for The Gloss in Edmond, Oklahoma. And I didn't know, Chloe, if you knew a lot about the Gloss before, but it's an international book club. Every month we read from a different genre. So we're presented with four different books in that genre, and then members of our book club vote for their favorite. And that's how we end up with the book that's selected. So I've been a member for about 5 years, and I love finding books I might not normally read. I really love the different genres every month. It's one of my favorite things about this book club. So that you were our selection for memoir, of course. But that's kind of, we do a memoir I think every year I've done it, we've done a memoir. We've had a range, so it's kind of neat. So welcome, Chloe. We're excited to have you.
Thank you so
Um,
much.
yeah,
I'm really honored. I'm really honored, and I'm really grateful you chose the book. Yeah.
it's fun. I think it's so neat because the members choose it. So.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I'm sure all of our members know Chloe Cooper Jones is a professor of writing and the director of the nonfiction concentration at Columbia University. I love that you were a Pulitzer Prize finalist for both the feature writing in 2020 and memoir in 2023 for this book, Easy Beauty, which Time magazine said is an exquisite exploration of disability, identity, and the human capacity to do and be more than we've ever dreamed. That's so lovely. Um, so I wanted to dive right into this book because there's so much to discuss. I love that quote from Time magazine yeah, because it covers so many topics within the book. I read your New York Times piece that I think was it last year or the year before, and you wrote that this book was about your reluctant acknowledged about your disability, preferring to abandon the notion of a body altogether and lead instead with ideas, words, or accomplishments in conversations with others. And that you charted your attempts to do this less, to be more in tune with your identity as a disabled woman and the inherent worth, power, and beauty of the disabled body. And I
Mhm.
really appreciated these comments. And so I was how you were looking at yourself and contemplating these big changes. So did it start with the idea of the book that you started noticing these things, or were you documenting these things and then came up with the idea for the book?
Yeah, well, I just really quickly have to say it's a really lovely way of introducing me in the book, and I appreciate that. And I'm really just excited to talk to you, and I appreciate your questions. Um, and yes, and hi to everybody, and again, thank you from the bottom of my heart that you read the book or chose the book. Um, yeah, to answer your question. I mean, I mean, I've been disabled my whole life. I was born into this body. So there's never a moment of my life in which I wasn't thinking about disability or thinking about other people's responses to my disability. But I grew up in sort of a period of time in which I think is really changing now in my son's generation. But I grew up in a period of time in which it was sort of considered almost rude to ever talk about disability or to ask any questions about somebody's body. It was sort of taken for granted that it was inherently a bad thing to be disabled. And so much of the narrative around disability that I grew up around was like this sense that it was something to not be talked about, to be lamented or pitied. There were very few stories about disabled people. I very rarely read about disabled people or saw films that center disability or television shows that center disability. And the few exceptions were often treating disability as sort of a tragic state of being, characters that died by the end of the book. And also there was just a sort of feeling that disability was always a peripheral state. It was never meant to be um, really focused on or deeply considered. And so that's sort of what I had internalized from not from my mother, who was nothing like that and really supported me understanding disability as being a powerful identity, but from everywhere else, basically. And so it really took until my son was born for me to start thinking about how unhealthy it was to sort of live with that understanding of myself in the world and understanding a disability in the world, to just sort of live silently with it and to sort of act as though it wasn't a really important part of who I was or who I am. And yeah, my son being born and sort of, as I'm sure if any of you are parents, you know that feeling of your child sort of being a productive and painful mirror back to your own behaviors or things you need to change in yourself so that you're not passing on the wrong things to this little person that you love so much. So that was when I started thinking about how to change. And in that process of trying to change, I just did what I always do as a writer. I just wrote about it and I wrote very personally about it. I had no intention of it becoming a book. And then it grew sort of from there, and I ended up publishing a tiny essay, and that essay reached readers in a way that was very surprising to me. And it taught me that there's a possibility that I could talk about my experiences in a way that anybody could find some identification with. It didn't have to be that you're disabled or that you have the same disability as I do, but that there's something very human in, yeah, this feeling of being sort of othered in the world, something very universal about that. So I tried to write into that place.
Yeah. I bet that is true. You probably didn't grow up like ever seeing yourself in a book or a movie or a TV show. Like, now when we are getting books for the library, I want every kid to see themselves as a character in a book. And it's so important when they see the book as a kid and you think, I have so many kids and they're like, that's me on the cover, and
Mhm.
it is, I mean, I haven't thought about that, but yeah, you probably didn't get to see that much growing up. Yourself reflected.
No, not really. And again, as the disabled characters that did appear were often played for a sort of either sort of laughable effect or pitiable effect or tragic effect that really was like a tool for a an able-bodied person's you know, greater development, whether it be, the example I give all the time is, which I love this book, but, it's like Beth and Little Women, where it's like the other sisters really have um, so many things happen to them. They have really full arcs and discover so many things in the world. And Beth is kind of there to be angelic and perfect, and then die to show the other sisters how to live and seize life. And then you have, I read as a young person, Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving, and an author that I really admire quite a lot and respect. But it was almost instantaneous that as soon as I picked up a book that had a disabled character in it, I knew they would die, such that the able-bodied person could sort of recognize their own, vitality or joie de vivre or whatever it was. Um, and that was a pattern that really still holds true, unfortunately, but I'm seeing so many changes now in my son's generation.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like the children's books that I see, I mean, our Sequoia books often have people in wheelchairs or people who have different disabilities. And I think that is so nice for other children to see that and grow up with that as normal.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So so the next thing is like I love titles and I love looking for the moment in the book where you kind of figure out where the title came from. So on page 131, you mentioned the British philosopher B- Bernard Boziquet,
Hmm.
and his term easy beauty, implying apparent and challenging, like a simple tune, a rose, a youthful face, the human
Hmm.
form in its prime, compared to difficult beauty, which requires more time, patience, and a higher amount of concentration, in which one encounters intimacy, intricacy, tension, and width. Did you know from the beginning this would be the title of the book? Was this something that you were kind of thinking about, or when did the title play into it?
No, absolutely not. I'm really bad at writing titles. Um, so bad. And as a journalist, I don't know if people know this, but as a journalist, you never write your own titles. It's always an editor. So I really didn't have to write very many titles in my life. And then when it came to this book, I came up with about 50 awful ideas for the title, all of which I very proudly pitched to my agent with all this excitement, going, "This is the one, this is the one." And she would very politely. She started out polite and then maybe got a little more direct, and as the bad titles kept coming. But so she titled this book. She said, "This is what it is." And as soon as she said it, I was like, "Oh, that's right. That's totally right." And now I'm finishing my second book and it's gone through, 10 different titles, all of which are bad. And it is about, 90% done and doesn't have a title still. I'm gonna give it to my agent. She'll probably figure it out. So titles are their own unique art form. And some people I know are really amazing at it, and I happen to be terrible at it. But the title ended up being so important, I think, to the book because of the sort of duality of that idea from Bosanquet that you just defined for us. And that Bosanquet really, the philosopher Bosanquet, he does not distinguish between one type of beauty being better than the other. And I think that's what's really important. He just wants us to think about two different ways of thinking, of considering beauty. That a lot of the beauty that we discover in our lives is easy beauty, and that it's apparent instantly. Like I'm in California right now visiting family, and there's so much easy beauty here. There's a lemon tree right outside my window. That's, as a New Yorker, is very thrilling to me to see a lemon tree. There's beautiful coastline everywhere. There's a gardenia in the room right now that smells so sweet. And Bosanquet really wants us to be attuned to those easy beauties, those apparent or very immediate beauties. But he also just doesn't want us to discount the power of difficult beauties, the kind that, like a really difficult text that you struggle with and then decipher and feel like so proud of yourself, or a really complicated piece of music that you need to hear two, three, four times to unlock the power of, or an abstract painting that you want to sit in front of for an hour before you can understand the sort of nuances of it. He was so smart to just give us these two ways of thinking about beauty. And my problem in the book, and this is why I think the book has a good title, no thanks to me, is that my sort of, the person I was at the beginning of the book, the Chloe at the beginning of the book, believes that she only is in possession of difficult beauty, and that the disabled body is only able to be seen after a lot
Hmm.
of consideration, a lot of work, a lot of, effort, and that and because of that, that person that I was really prioritized difficult beauty and deprioritized easy beauty, which is not what Bosanquet wants us to do. And by the end of the book, part of the sort of most distinct growth of the character of me in this, one text is the appreciation for easy beauty. So the end of the book is really focused on um, trying to very eloquently and reverentially describe moments of simpler joy and simpler beauty, such as just the very end of the book is me walking my son home on a beautiful October day in New York City, and just really finding all the beauty in the world in that simple act with him. So I think that title is a key to sort of the core emotional sort of journey in the book.
Hmm. Did your screen change?
Yeah. What's that? I don't know why.
I don't know
Can
what
you still see me though?
Yeah, I can see you, but just like the main part of the
There's
screen.
some sort of like
Someone
graph
has
or something.
started sharing their screen. They shared a whiteboard.
Oh,
So you can actually go up to the three dots and actually stop their sharing.
three dots.
So Ruth Brown has shared her screen.
Okay, I see.
Okay. Oh, it's gone now. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
There were some cool dots for a little while. I don't know why. Yeah. Great.
Okay. Well, so, oh yes. I think I probably I bet I was wondering if this was the message you wanted to convey in this book to challenge readers to consider more thoughtfully easy beauty and difficult beauty in their
Mhm.
lives. What were some other, like, was that the main message you wanted people to think of when they finished reading the book, or did you have a message that you really wanted people to take with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that yeah, I mean, a few main things that I think are really important to consider. And as the title gives away, our conception of what beauty is in our lives is one of the things I think I'm hoping that readers feel that they have had a chance to reflect on a little differently after reading the book. And I think it's really important. I think people have kind of mistaken when I say beauty, I think we quite often think of like physical beauty and the body. And that obviously is a theme in the book. I'm talking a lot about the body, but for the most part, the narrator of the book, I say this just because, it's when you're writing about oneself, it's never all of you, it's always a slice of you. So the narrator, who is me, in the book, is really trying to change something about herself and is trying to open herself and advance herself, right? I'm really stuck in one particular way of thinking about how I relate to the world. And the book is charting this like desperate desire to shift that, and to change into a much more empathetic, compassionate, open person, such that I can be a better parent, hopefully.
Mm.
So because I studied philosophy, it was sort of an immediate and easy thing for me to sort of check with the philosophers on how we make big changes. And the philosopher Iris Murdoch has this theory that's talked about in the book called unselfing. And it's also a theory about beauty. And it is really simple. She taught, and I write about this in the book, but it's this simple idea that you can be sitting in your room, sort of stressed out about something, exhausted or worried or anxious about something. And in that moment, you may catch from the corner of your eye something beautiful. So she describes an example of seeing a bird, the kestrel. And for that moment, everything is in her is focused on that fleeting beauty of this bird. And then when she returns to herself, she's different. She's taken in more of the world. She's taken in more of nature. She's thought about, other living creatures other than herself. And so in this theory of hers called unselfing, um, she thinks a lot about how experiencing beauty, whether
Okay, so you open the book with the provocative line, I'm in a bar in Brooklyn listening to two men, my friends, discuss whether my life is worth living. How did you decide this was the place to begin? Was that moment a turning point or reflection of
Mhm.
something deeper you'd been carrying?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. I mean, yeah, it's the inciting event of the book. Um, and not because these two men sort of argue about something that's relevant to disability, which, is they make one of the men makes a sort of eugenicist, not a sort of, a very eugenicist argument, that a body like mine ideally would have been aborted and that disability wouldn't exist in the world. And I think that, that's not the turning point of the book. That's not the inciting event of the book. I've heard eugenicist arguments my whole life, and people kind of constantly are making eugenicist arguments, whether they're aware of it or not. Sometimes it happens quite subtly or almost semi-consciously. So that was not new, but what was new is that I recognized that I had a very distinct habit of when I was in a moment of sort of social discomfort, especially relating to my body, that I would disappear into what I call the neutral room. And that's the neutral room was a place that I'd been taught as a young person to think about managing pain. So the neutral room sort of it's not dissimilar to dissociating, really. Um, and the difference was in that moment I became aware of it. I'd done it so seamlessly my whole life. When someone was unkind to me or when somebody was asking me something that made me uncomfortable or just really any social discomfort, I had this way of kind of dissociating from it. And then the moment would pass and then I could just kind of live my life without processing it. And the inciting event is really an awareness that I'm doing that and this desire to, instead of doing that, find language to engage and have a real conversation with people who have some maybe ableist ideas. So that became the quest because I found that I had no language, I had no voice to just sort of discuss with this person why those ideas were so problematic and wrong-headed. All I wanted to do was escape. And it was a moment that taught me something about my own ability to be complicit in bad arguments by being silent. And so the that it sends me on a quest of sorts to create this change. And the change ultimately is yes about being able to articulate these things for someone who may have that kind of conversation with me. But again, it was also just about really making sure that I was setting the right example for my son so that he could go on in his life being able to speak powerfully and articulately about what he thinks is right. And so that took a lot of time for me to figure out how to get to that place. And that's why the book starts there, because the, early parts of my life are not really relevant. This book is about one particular journey to change one particular thing.
So if you were in the same room today, do you feel like you would responded differently? Would you respond differently to me?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
You
Yeah,
would
I would have a totally different response. Hmm.
try to have more of a conversation with them, or what do you?
Yeah, conversation or engage in a way that feels like not being complicit in bad beliefs. Yeah. But also another option is to not feel like it's my job to educate every single man in a bar, and instead to dismiss the situation for my own peace, which I think is always somebody's choice if they need to do that, but to not internalize it. And I think that was the other thing is that I would hear these arguments and I would internalize it and I would be like, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with my body. I need to feel ashamed. I need to feel hurt. And now I don't do that. I'm like, that's on you if if you have that really prejudiced outlook, like I don't have to take that on. I can leave that with you. And the book charts the sort of natural endpoint where I meet another man at a bar who says another kind of unkind thing, and I can see him with sort of empathy. I can see his pain that's driving this sort of comment to me, and then I just leave and go home, and I don't wear the pain of other people in the same way that I used to. So that's part of that arc
That
of
healing.
the book as well.
Yeah. Did the two friends that you were at the bar with originally, someone asked in the comments, Rita, do you know if they've read your memoir or
One
what?
house, yeah. I don't know about the other one.
Did he have any comments about it?
Yeah, he's my really good friend. He's
Yeah,
really one of them is my very good friend and is super supportive of me.
that's
And he
great.
read it as I was working on it.
That's
And
nice
I
that you can have those conversations with people too, you know.
well, it's yeah, I mean, one of the friends was defending me, and one of them wasn't.
Oh,
And so that's important. My friend, who's Jay in the book, wasn't agreeing
right.
with what was being said. So um, he was really incredibly supportive at that time and continues to be. And I talked to him, he pops up throughout the whole book, and I talked to him a lot about what would or wouldn't be in the book when I was working on it.
Yeah. Um, One of the things I found really interesting in the book was the conversations about art. I studied art a little bit in college.
Nice.
How did the book how the book starts with Bernini. My son loves mythology, and so I was really interested in this story.
Mhm.
But I wasn't familiar with this sculpture of Persephone and Pluto, but after reading your description and analyzing this sculpture, um, I thought, it does probably originally come across as easy beauty, but the story is actually pretty complicated. It's not
Mhm.
such a pretty topic, which I
Yeah.
liked how you described that. You write that he kept the tension apparent, the scene uneasy. Can you talk a little bit about why you wanted to include art like this throughout the book?
Well, art is very important to my life, and I study art and write quite a bit about art in general. It's probably something that will follow everything I write forever, is thinking about art making and artists and why art has such a powerful um, ability to change me. I mean, I've had so many of the most exciting moments of my life have been in the presence of art that other people make. And that Bernini sculpture is, one of the more sort of revered sculptures in the Villa Borghese in Rome. And it is just an incredible work of nuance and detail. There are many, many people who've obviously made sculptures or paintings, or written poems about stories from Greek mythology or from Ovid's Metamorphosis. And yet, Bernini really brings as you said so well, the messiness of some of these stories to the forefront through the complexity of touch and through, the amazing ways in which he captures expressions in his sculptures. So you don't feel like you're sort of looking at history. You feel like you're looking at like a set of living ideas. And so I was just very moved by that sculpture, and I thought that it played a really important role in sort of the beginning of my quest and sort of thinking about the complexity of that myth too, um, and this idea that Persephone ends up being a woman who in the mythology always lives a half life. She lives half of her life in the underworld with Pluto or with Hades, depending on which you're saying, Greek or Roman, and then half of her life in the light. And that felt very familiar to me. So the duality of that story and the tension of that story I thought was like a really important parallel to sort of what I was embarking on.
Yeah. I could see that when you described the hands and the thigh, I was like, and then when I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, you do see that tension. And I don't know. I can imagine that is a powerful sculpture.
Hmm.
Um, I heard you mention on another interview in this section, following this Bernini sculpture, where you were having to stop and go into your neutral room and count to eight. Then in the next paragraph, all of the sentences have eight syllables. I love that. And I went back to that paragraph. We're only on page eight here and studied it. Did you do other things like that throughout this book or?
Yeah, I did. And I did because, not because I thought people would necessarily pick up on all of it, but more because I think that our subconscious is always interacting with art. We're never meeting art, or the natural world on a purely conscious level. There's always some part of our senses or some deeper intuitive sense that is meeting the art object. And I was also really interested in the way I was listening to, I was really listening a lot to this podcast about how songs are made, and it would be interviews with producers. And I was so fascinated by when a producer really talks about um, all the different tracks or textures that they'll layer to create a song, whether it's like the classic Phil Spector Wall of Sound or a contemporary pop song, you'll often be hearing things that your ear can't discern on its own or pick out, but it's something about the layeredness or the texturedness of the song that really makes it so powerful. And I thought that was so cool. I was like, well, I mean, writers do that too through symbolism and imagery and metaphor that maybe you can't always immediately recognize on the page. And maybe even in your second read, you don't recognize, but maybe in your third or fourth. And I wanted to write a book that people had a desire to come back to and read again, or felt like in 5 years, oh, it's time to read that again. And so I have a ton of layering that's quite subtle. So that's one is when I introduce the neutral room, which is a place in which I count to eight. In the next paragraph, every sentence has eight syllables to create that eight. You don't necessarily ever notice that on your own, but whether you notice it or not, when you're reading for a paragraph, your ear is hearing an eight count, just like my head does an eight count. Another one is so in philosophy, it's very common for, especially like in the Platonic tradition, for the sun to represent the truth. So probably most people know this through Plato's allegory of the cave, where there's a group of people that are tied up in a cave and they're having to look at shadows on the wall. That's all they know. And then one day somebody's unchained, brought out of the cave and shown the light of the world. And that light is painful at first, and then their eyes adjust. And when they bring that truth back into the cave, everybody thinks they're crazy and tries to kill them. And it's a, it's an allegory for the truth being, often you have to be led to the truth by a great liberator or educator, and the truth is often incredibly painful at first. But if we allow, and can cause people to doubt us, but if we allow ourselves to sit with the truth, it eventually is not painful, but is this illuminating force. And so that metaphor of the sun being the truth kind of shows up all the way through ancient Greek philosophy, especially. And so I was like, okay, I'll do that in my book. I was like, I love this. So at the very beginning of the book, I mean, typically every description of the sun is indicating something about my mental state as I'm on this journey. So at the very beginning in Rome, this where I'm the furthest away from transformation, any sort of I'm at my worst, we'll say simply. The sun is really aggressive. It's like demoralizing me. It's making, and it also helped that it is just factually true that July in Rome is really oppressively hot. So that worked well. But I really labored the descriptions of the sun for this purpose, so that it was this external description of what was happening internally in me. And there's another point in the book where I'm starting to come to a form of realization, and the sun is sort of dipping in and out of shade, and it's in that half darkness, half light. And then by the end of the book, there's a very particular description of the sun as I'm walking my child home from school. And the sun is this like very soft, protective glow. And that is a sort of final arrival at an external description of an internal state. And that I just stole that from Plato. So, which we can all do. And I recommend everyone do. Yeah.
I love things like that. When I went back and I was like counting the syllables in that paragraph, I was like, oh, that's beautiful. I just love things like that. I love
Yeah.
that you put those little, it does make it something to look for, or think about as you go back through something, if you, like you say, if you want to read it again or, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite books are books that I typically feel that I can't wait to reread. Maybe some I reread every 5 years, maybe it's even 20 years, but there's something in it that I go, I'm gonna come back to this. And then I think we've all read books where you read it once and maybe you even really like it, but you know you're never coming back to it. You're like, okay, I've read it and it's done and it served its purpose and there's no shade on those books, but I'm done. And those are the books I can love, but then I give away or I donate eventually when I have to purge my bookshelves. Um, but some books will have and will continue to live on my shelf forever. I will never give them away. They are in unbelievably precious objects to me with my years of marginal notes. And I really wanted to write books in my life, not just this book, but all my books. I wanted people to feel like there was so much in it, like so much linguistically, so much in terms of craft and structure that they really wanted to keep it on their shelf and that they wanted to write in it and dog ear it and underline passages and put notes in the margins and come back to it in a year or 5 years or 20 years and feel like there was be something new there for them. So that's what I'm really trying to do. And I find that layering sentences or layering imagery or having ideas that are complex enough that you might read it once and then go, I want to think about that and come back to it. It's what I really like to do. I think authors, and I'm getting hopefully better at that as I get older, but the authors that I love that do that, I feel this sort of unbelievable generosity from them. And I'm just so like grateful that they're willing to spend so much of their lives like, agonizing over a sentence that brings me so much joy. So that's always on my mind when I'm working.
Oh, that's neat. I mean, you definitely sent me on a lot of deep dives. Like I would read something and I would have to go look look up things and you kept me busy. I was having to do a
Oh,
lot of
good. I love that. We love a deep dive. We love a
work.
list of things in the back of a book. I have so many books where it's
Yeah.
like lists of things to read or look up that and that's the most fun thing.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
a lot to think about for sure. Yeah. So I also thought about the discussion of your dissertation was interesting. This is more toward page 175. You go to Cambodia to consider
Mhm.
Aristotle's paradox of tragedy through the lens of dark tourism.
Mhm.
Um, if we do not want to wish to encounter human suffering in real life, why do we take aesthetic pleasure from encountering it in art? I thought that was such an interesting question. Maybe you hope to understand the distance you felt toward your normal life, and yet when you went, you felt like people didn't seem changed leaving the places. They entered stoic and respectful and left stoic and respectful. So I thought this trip and the conversations with the taxi driver were so meaningful. And I wondered how this trip changed your dissertation and if you ended up using it or changing it or how all of that worked out.
Yeah, well, I think, I wish I could take credit for that great question, but of course it's Aristotle's great question. And I just found this to be such an interesting and rich subject matter. And it's sort of there are many iterations of people who have explored the paradox of tragedy. So just very simply, although you said it so perfectly, it's this idea that there are certain things that we would not want to experience in our own lives or in the lives of people we love, but we do want to experience them in art. And Aristotle talks about people spending their free time and their limited resources to go see Oedipus Rex or something, which is very depressing and violent and that creates this sort of incredible experience. And it's like, well, why? I don't want to be Oedipus. I don't want any of that. I don't want to be um, close to any sort of sorrow like that. And yet I want to read that play or imagine seeing it in the Agora in ancient Greece. And other philosophers have asked this question of sad music. Um, and other philosophers have asked this question about, really difficult or sad literature. And then my mentor at the grad center is a philosopher named Noel Carroll, who wrote a version of this, asking similar questions about horror films, which I think is so cool.
Yeah.
Why are horror films so successful, and what does that have to do with um, our human need for them? Why do they exist? So, Aristotle's argument has to do something with catharsis, that a lot of different forms of art could bring us to an emotional catharsis, and that in a way, which is like a purging of our emotions, and that in a way, art can serve as this tool that helps us purge emotions that we have in ourselves. Aristotle says like pity or fear, and put them in a safe place, like
Mm.
at the feet of an actor playing Oedipus Rex, instead of at our child, or our partner or a stranger in traffic. And so I think in a way, this idea of catharsis and this idea of the aesthetic experience and how it changes us is something that I'm kind of always writing about. I've thought about it in philosophical terms, but I'm much more interested in how it manifests just in our sort of everyday life. And so, in a way, these questions I think are filtered into um, almost everything that I write, because they kind of come back to this bigger question, which is just simply, why is art so essential in the lives of humans? Not a hobby, not for pleasure, not for fun, not just some thing that we do peripherally to like the realer things, which is sometimes the narrative we get told about art, but why is it actually completely essential for human flourishing and meaning? And this is something that philosophers and people who study the history of art or aesthetics are really good at coming up with cool ways of answering that question. So I think that just runs through everything that I do.
That's neat. Do you feel like it, like going there and seeing all of that changed? It sounded like it changed what you were going to do with your dissertation. Did it end up changing it more than you
Yeah,
thought?
lots of things changed after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really
Yeah.
transformative experience.
Well, I could ask you questions all day, but I have some people that have asked really good questions in the chat, and I don't know if they want to ask their questions themselves. Is it Zara? Is it Zara Frank? Has a question from Singapore. Is she on?
Go ahead, you
Hi,
could.
Shauna, you can read it out. No, you can read it out. The questions right there.
Oh, okay. It says, Hi, Chloe. Our book club in Singapore recently read Easy Beauty and really enjoyed exploring its themes and your narrative voice. One debate that came up was about the structure of your travels. Some of us felt there were two distinct trips. One arranged by your husband to see Beyonce, which was a fun story, and another solo journey of self-discovery. Others felt it read more like one continuous unfolding rather than separate trips. We would love to know, how did you envision the structure of your travels when writing this book? Were they meant to be distinct episodes or more of a singular evolving experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's an interesting question. I do think of them as one particular period of my life. That's about 18 months in which a very particular set of questions were on my mind quite a lot. It did just sort of coincide that during those 18 months, I was traveling for a lot of different reasons and traveling alone, always alone. And yes, it's true that my husband sort of prompted some of these things with Beyonce specifically by getting me the tickets that I wouldn't get for myself. But everything else outside of that was my decision of where to go and why. And it was all part of the sort of solo exploration. And it also happened that I was working as a journalist, and so sometimes I'd be sent somewhere, and or I was constantly being sent somewhere, and I was also as a student researching many things. So it ended up being that this time period in my life is still very filled with travel. That's sort of a constant for me. My son and I just got back from a um, multi-day road trip along the California coast. And we just got back from Carmel today, and now we're in the Bay Area, and then we fly to New York tomorrow, and then we'll go to Kent. So I'm just sort of my natural state is to be on the move. So I think that any period of my life would sort of probably naturally incorporate so much travel writing. But it was true that this particular 18-month period was part of one sort of single evolving um, like desire to discover something about myself, and that I was doing it very purposely by being out in the world alone and making certain observations. But when I was doing all of this, I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm writing a book right now. It, because I honestly I was just working, or I was studying, or I was looking at art and I was thinking about other things. And I was taking these notes that were meant to be very personal and just for myself. I never thought I would write nonfiction at all outside of journalism, certainly not a memoir. And it was only once I had these documents that sort of chronicled these trips that I looked back and I saw the sort of natural arc. And I saw the sort of time period of these two, especially these two meetings at a bar. And that's what really shifted my understanding of what could be written. I was like, okay, this is a particular book, but a particular time period in which I'm tackling one problem. And the structure was sort of apparent, and that made it luckily very easy to write. I wrote this book in a year, and I'm writing my second book now, and it's taking forever because I don't have it's so much harder. So I was lucky in a way that there was a very clear beginning, middle, and end in this structure for me.
Is your second book going to be a continuation of this book? Is it also a memoir?
No, absolutely not. No. It's about art though, and it's in my mother, and but a very different set of subjects. Yeah.
Well, I enjoyed your New York Times. I felt like the New York Times article kind of picked up where I don't know what you would call that, but it kind of picked
Mhm.
up where this ended, and I
Oh
appreciate.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's another book someday. Yeah. Right now I'm
Okay.
writing about a painter from the Bay Area, and also about devotion, the sort of question of what devotion is, and that sort of threshold where on the positive side of a threshold, devotion can be a source of kind of incredible connection or an ennobling thing. And there's also a threshold that if you cross, devotion can be a form of sort of self-erasure. And I'm really interested in that question, but specifically through the lens of a painter that I love. So
Have you
that's
loved
good.
art since you were a child? Like, was that something that you kind of
Mhm.
grew up with?
Yeah, I grew up with a lot of it. And one of my favorite things and I write about this in Easy Beauty, but one of I think the greatest gifts that my parents gave me is two different ways of thinking about art in our lives. My father was very much like big, big books, big poems, big, make things like create create your best work and make sure the world can see it. And that's cool. There's like a lot that's really energizing about that way of thinking of art making. And my mother, who I think is the most brilliant, talented, like just incredible artist, just infused every single aspect of everyday life with artfulness. So it'd be like using your creativity to make us a meal that I'd never had, or hand painting, my bedposts and my dressers. And there was a way in which she was just constantly creating, but it was creative energy that just like enriched the everyday. And having both of those voices in my head, I think is such a gift.
Yeah. And appreciating the little beauty and kind of that full circle. Yeah. Okay, Patty, Emery, did you want to ask your question? Yeah. Is
Can you
Patty
hear
on?
me?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you. Now I can. Are you?
Hi.
Uh, um,
Oh,
hi, hi, you're a real person. You
Me?
write, uh, you
I'm
write
real.
about the process of learning to see. For example,
Hmm.
learning to see what was apparent to other journalists covering tennis, but was invisible to you. But by
Hmm.
following Federer, which I'm envious of, you trained your eye to see. You've expressed in an interview with Roxane Gay that learning to see is something you hope to continue for the rest of your life. What other difficult beauties have you learned to see?
Oh, thank you, Patty. This is such a great question because it allows me to talk about, yeah, one of my absolute favorite things in the world, which is um, when we have perceptual shifts that we didn't think were
Yes.
possible. And of course, there's a way in which I'm always, when I'm talking about that with tennis, I'm also talking about the way people see my body and sort of waiting for their perception to shift to see me as like a real person and not just a really othered body, which is probably an experience all of us can relate to in some way. That moment in which you're like waiting for someone to get over whatever barriers their limited perception has so that they can like see you as a real person. It's not specific to disability. I think that's very universal. But the way that I sort of get into that is the very literal things in tennis that um, I I knew people were seeing things, but when I started watching tennis, all I could see is a ball going over the net, and sometimes it wouldn't go over the net, and then there would be it's like there was a literal block in my perceptual abilities, and it was the coolest thing ever to me. And this has obviously happened all over in my life, but it was the most amazing thing to study, to seek good teachers, to listen, to learn, to observe, to have patience. And by taking all of those things, slowly, my perception literally changes where things that I could not perceive before became apparent, like, the little ways in which a tennis player would disguise their serve, or the ways that they would read the serve of another player and then move in position to better receive that. So, I mean, there's just a million little examples. And suddenly the game became unbelievably complex and compelling to me, whereas before it was just a ball going over a net or not. And that's happened. It is my favorite feeling. It happens over and over and over and over again if we allow ourselves the patience for it, right? So I think, it happens all the time with art where I look at a painting or I look at a sculpture and I'm not that interested in it or I don't understand it. And then somebody explains its context or I read about it or I look at it longer and I give myself time to really think about it and study it. Or somebody that I respect is really thrilled and teaches me something and then I see it differently. I mean, that's the best feeling. Um, and it's different than being influenced. I think that's what's really important. It's very distinct from just being influenced. It's not about having an impression of something and then being talked out of it. It is
Mm-hmm.
literally the process of having one impression and then education, time, and
Mm-hmm.
effort deepening that impression. And that happens to me, I mean, it happens to me all the time. And I think the most powerful thing is maybe this is a silly example, but the most recent relevant thing is I am gardening now for the first time. I've always
Mm-hmm.
lived in cities. I've always traveled so much. I've never had a garden. And I am so obsessed with my garden now. And and I'm learning so much. And I'm planting things and they're growing and it's a miracle. But now when I'm in normal settings, I'm seeing different things. I'm looking at other people's gardens. I'm understanding the work that certain gardens go into. I'm understanding why they planted things next to each other or not. I'm looking at their irrigation systems. I'm looking at, how they cage their tomatoes and tie them properly.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm literally seeing my everyday surroundings so differently because of the new level of education that I'm receiving as I'm myself becoming a gardener. So the world is a little, through that knowledge acquisition, the world is a little brighter, it's a little more complex, it's a little more interesting. I'm a little more curious about it. And that's just like this summer's example, there's always something, and that's why I love being a student in this world, in every way possible, because it just, yeah, that feeling of perceptual shift and depth is the best. It's so
Yes.
rewarding.
Yes, I agree. I'm so excited that you put it into words and that someone else shares that. So thank
Oh,
you.
I love that.
I, I,
Thanks for asking that, Patty. That's
you're
got me
welcome.
really excited. I'm like, I love this
Yes.
stuff so much. Yeah.
Okay, I have another question from Megan. Megan, do you want to ask your question? Megan.
Yeah, I'm happy
Okay.
to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. And really, Patty, that was a great question. And I feel like, Chloe, your answer segues great into my question, really. First and foremost, I really enjoyed your piece of work. It really resonated with me. And while reading it, I found that it sat with me in a similar way that white fragility did. And I'm really curious if other folks have shared that perspective with you, like as far as self-reflecting around prejudice and societal norms, taking an inventory of current current prejudices. I have a cat that's hanging out with me right now.
Cool.
And I'm curious if you've read White Fragility and appreciate
Mhm.
or see any of these parallels.
Yes, I have. I have read White Fragility. I wouldn't compare my book to any other book because that feels like, I'd run into being sort of self-aggrandizing or something. But I have had many people, many, many people very graciously, generously, lovingly share that my book has changed their mind or has prompted some self-reflection. And there are many areas in which I think it's caused some conversation, either like from my friends and family. I think people who are really close to me will kind of reflect um, on what I say about pain in the book and think about pain a little bit differently in my life and in theirs, because I write a lot about the pain that I experience. But I've had really interesting conversations with people about really good intentions that communicate a prejudice. And I think that is one of the hardest things with disability is that a lot of the prejudice or the lowered expectations for the disabled come from people's really well-meaning, kind intentions. So for example, I was just recently traveling in a state, I won't say, not California, somewhere else, and people were so nice to me. I couldn't believe how nice I'm from New York, so it's very, I mean, I live in New York now. It's very different for me to be in the state where people are so nice, but their kindness would sort of come with a, a a voicing of what they thought I was incapable of. So it would just be like I was walking somewhere and had a bag and somebody came up behind me and said, "I'll carry that for you. Let me carry that. Like I think you should be careful and let me carry that." And while that seems very kind, it is also giving voice to a few things. One, that you are perceiving me as incapable of knowing the size and weight of a bag that I can carry, which is sort of an indication that you don't think that I can manage myself and my body, that I didn't come up with a plan for this bag, that I'm carrying, or I was getting into a van with some people, and I'm very, very short, so it is difficult for me to step up into a high van, but people immediately were like, "Oh, is this too hard? What are we gonna do? We have to figure out it." And I was like, I'm now 42. Like I have encountered vans before, and I have a plan for them. I have a plan for cars, I have a plan for vans, I have a plan for bags, I have a plan for the subway. And it's you're sort of telling on yourself with kindness though, and that's really complex. It's a really messy area. So I try to be really empathetic. And I think the what can move me into a less empathetic place though is when people offer me help and I say, "Thank you so much. I'm actually okay. I've figured out how to get into vans. I'm doing okay." And then they don't listen to that answer. That's when I really run into, and I've had people talk to me about that because I talk about that in the book. That's when I really run into a problem of like prejudice that steps over a line, because it's an assumption that they know better than me, that if you offer help and I say thank you, but no, and you don't listen to that answer, then you don't believe I have agency. You don't believe that you don't trust me to know myself or my body. You're not your good intentions have moved into um, something that is actually about control or about a complete disbelief in somebody else's like autonomy. And that I try still to be very kind when people do that, but that crosses a line for me. And so that was something that I think a lot of my readers were um, doing some self auditing on, and I really appreciated some of the conversations that we had. And also I have to say, it is very important for me to say that I do that same thing to my son, and I'm trying to do it less. Okay. My son is so brilliant, capable, and full of agency. And as the mother who loves him so much, I have to sometimes go, you're right, you can do it. My bad. Nope, and not not cross the line of his agency or his autonomy. And so it's complex. It's just complex. It's like um it's just something that needs some serious thought for myself, for all of us probably.
Yeah. Parenting really does open your eyes, doesn't it, to like these things about yourself that you're like, oh, I guess I do that too.
Absolutely. It's a great you really learn a lot of valuable lessons and I'm grateful for those lessons. Yeah.
I'm too. I love that about being a parent.
Hmm.
I hate that I'm out of time because I still have all the questions. But anyway, we really appreciate you taking your time to join us tonight, and we look forward to seeing your next book on art and
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciated all this. And again, thank you for anybody who read my book or recommends my book. It really means so much in the life of an author. And so yeah, just please know you have my most genuine gratitude for that.
well, you've just been so lovely to interview, and I appreciate your answers and your thoughtfulness about all of it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, bye everybody.